Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and on this episode, we go east to Green Bay, Wisconsin, to talk to Bret Alexander, owner and operator of Alexander Sport Fishing Guide Service. Bret and his team of guides are dedicated fishermen targeting trophy walleyes, northern pike, muskies, smallmouth bass year-round over on the Bay of Green Bay and the surrounding area. Bret is a wealth of information. He's been in this industry a long time. He's an absolute fish head. He's collaborated with some of the biggest TV hosts in the industry. He's also all over YouTube. There's just so much content out there with Bret Alexander's name on it, helping people learn how to catch more big fish. On this podcast, we cover trophy walleyes on the Great Lakes in the fall. Now, if there's one thing I can say about Bret is this guy is busy. He has no downtime. When he's getting done with one guide trip, he's getting ready for the next. So we're lucky to have him on this podcast. We cover a ton of ground in a short amount of time, talking trophy walleyes on the Great Lakes in the fall. You're not going to want to miss a minute of what Bret has to say on this week's JMO Podcast. Make sure to head on down to the comments section with your thoughts or recommendations for topics and guests for upcoming JMO podcasts, or head on over to our social medias at Instagram and Facebook at Jason Mitchell Outdoors. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you start talking fall walleyes, big fall walleyes out in your country?
First thing that comes to my mind is deep water breaks and where all the bait fish are going to be at that time. I'll go into those areas and use my electronics, locate the bait fish, and then, wherever the bait's going to be in the fall, usually the big walleyes are going to be not far behind them.
And, if those are the biggest factors to consider, what is that, how does that really translate into a day of fishing? I mean, do you have to cover a lot of water to do those things? And are you choosing methods, of course, to relate to those things? I mean, how does that work into a day of fishing?
Well, typically the first thing that I'll look at is what the winds are doing, what direction, how strong they're going to be, of course. And, your winds are going to determine how the bait fish and how the walleye set up on the different structure in the fall. So that's, the day before my trip, I'll look at wind directions and then determine at that point where I'm going to fish. There may be days where you got to run and hit, 2, 3, 4 different spots before you find them. But more than likely, if you're hitting that structure on that wind-blown structure in the fall, those fish are going to be there just because it's a matter of fact that the bait fish are going to be blowing in there.
And what is the most prominent bait when where you're at? I mean, you're fishing the Great Lakes. A lot of people maybe don't know just exactly the variety of bait that's out there. When you're marking bait, what are you usually marking?
Well, the main three forage for the walleyes is going to be gizzard shad, alewife, and gobies. Gobies is probably their number one diet, and the gobies are always going to be in the rocks. But the alewife and the gizzard shad, that's going to be your bait fish it's going to be your wind-blown bait fish that gets blown into the structure that you're looking for.
And talking about methods of fishing, I mean, what's your decision-making process when you are working over those spots? I mean, when you're trolling, what does your gear setup look like, accordingly so that you can target these fish?
Well, a lot of times I'll roll into an area, and if I see the fish spread out in an area, then we'll go to trolling and pull cranks through those areas. If I see a high concentration of fish in one local area, then we'll go to, like shiver minnows and more casting techniques with either hair jigs or shiver minnows, jigs and plastics, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, how deep does your tackle box get? I mean, what does your arsenal look like, or is it really simple in the boat, or do you kind of gotta have a little bit of nuance and have some stuff ready?
Well, I've got every nook and cranny in my boat full. But yeah, I mean, it's a big arsenal of different baits. In the fall, though, it's a little bit easier because it's typically going to be pulling cranks or casting, say, either Rapala jigging wraps, shiver minnows, swim baits, heavy swim baits. I like to throw like a half ounce or 3/4 ounce heads in the fall with some bigger profile swim baits. And then the hair jig can be really, really deadly in the fall time.
And I mean, are you working these spots over pretty hard? I mean, if you're seeing what you want to see on the electronics, I mean, are they going to bite? Do you wait them out, or is there some nuance to how you, are trying to look for active fish? And if these ones ain't, you got to go find something else.
Yeah, typically when you mark a pot of walleyes in an area, the ones that are active, you're going to catch pretty quick. So a lot of times I'll go into a spot, I'll fish it, for maybe an hour, hour and a half. We'll catch all the active fish. You'll notice that it's going to slow down dramatically pretty quick after that. Then I'll bug out of there and then I'll go hit a fresh spot. And there may be times where I'll go back and hit that spot again later in the day because you're going to have your active fish and your inactive fish. And if you give it some time, a lot of those fish are going to go, more on the feed than being, if they were negative when you were there earlier. So it's always good, if you have a good spot where you get them good, then it slows down 9 times out of 10. You can go back there and get another handful of fish a little bit later in the day.
Hey, that was kind of my next question. I mean, a lot of these patterns, are they pretty replicable day to day, week to week, year to year as you go through that fall time frame? Or are you planning on hitting fresh spots every day when you leave the ramp? Are you telling your clients, hey, if we're going after better walleyes, we caught them yesterday, but we might have to go looking today? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's pretty, pattern ball. It's all timing on water temps, but, from year to year, during certain months of the year, more than likely those fish are going to be in the same areas. But water temps, play a key effect in it. So you may have a good wind that blows and you're going to think everything's going to be set up and you roll in there and the water temps drop 7 degrees and it could be bare too. So it's not 100%, but I would say, 75% of the time, if you pattern your histories, those fish should be there.
What would be some some effective advice on using electronics? I mean, using electronics is such a big thing nowadays, and people spend a lot of money on it. And the reality is, a lot of people probably have electronics that they may or may not even know how to use completely. What would be some advice or some nuance to using your electronics when you're working over these fish?
Yeah, I mean, electronics is number one to me. I mean, if I roll into a spot and I mark 7 walleyes, you know how many fish are sitting there. You a lot of times you can mark them and you cast, where the spot is, where they're sitting. You put a waypoint right over and reposition your boat. And I mean, it's more like playing a video game nowadays. It's definitely made my job a lot easier, and I rely on my electronics 100%. I mean, if I didn't have it, it'd definitely be a game changer for what I'm doing right now.
Would you say, bang for your buck, is that probably some of the best money spent if somebody is going to come out to, the Great Lakes, for example, and in the fall, or any time of year, probably, what would be some more examples of good investments made into your boat or equipment, whether you're coming out there for the first time or you're just beefing up your arsenal to make your next trip a little better?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a lot of people ask me, where should I be spending my money as far as for bettering my game at fishing? And electronics, I would say, is number one. And then, like, another one would be like a rod and reel. I would much rather spend the money on a good reel, because the rods is, it's nice to have a good rod too, but definitely a good reel to me is where it's at. But electronics is, I mean, if you're going to spend a good chunk of money, that I would say electronics is number one in my book.
Right on, man. I mean, what are some other trendy things when it comes to fall fishing questions that you get asked? And you know, we're talking walleyes here, but you can really talk about anything when it comes to fall. It's a fun time of year to fish because these fish are putting the feed bag on, across the board, all the species. I mean, what are some of the big trendy things that you enjoy talking about, or that you just hear a lot of questions about in the fall?
Um, I get a lot of guys that are always asking me how deep to fish, how deep should I fish in the fall, and there again you fall back on your electronics. You roll into an area, and I mean you got a screen right there that tells you where they are. But one mistake I see a lot of people doing in the fall is they're fishing way too shallow. Typically, on an average day, I'm fishing at least 20 to 30 feet of water, off the edges of the structure. More than likely, those fish are going to be on the deep sides, unless you have a really, really big wind. Then they'll lay up on top of the structure. But more than likely, it's going to be on the deep edges of the structure in the fall.
And have these patterns, you talk about these patterns, do you think guys are missing the mark because they're fishing memories from years ago? I mean, are these things changing all the time? What in your career, you've been around for quite a while, and you've been quite a maestro out there in finding these big walleyes throughout the year. What has been some of the ebbs and flows in your time out there?
I fish a lot of memories, but I can tell you that these fish will do different things from year to year. You'll have, different pods of fish that'll totally set up in a complete different area from year to year. But, a good portion of the time, the memory game still works really good. I mean, I still do it, every year, but, and I'm still learning, new spots, and it's good to venture out and check new stuff because these fish do move from year to year. One year you'll see the West Shore of Green Bay light up and it's on fire, and then the next year, it's dead on the West Shore and it's hot on the East Shore. And I think a lot of that plays effect on when you get some big dominant winds, especially in the fall. In the fall, we typically have a dominant northwest wind on Green Bay. But you can have a year where you get some strong east winds, and that's going to blow all your bait fish to the other side of the bay and on certain sides of the structure. So Mother Nature is gonna ultimately determine what the fish do. But if the dominant winds hold true from year to year, which more than likely they do, then the memory fishing is definitely going to work.
One thing that comes up on the Great Lakes, for instance, is current. How much does somebody need to be paying attention to current when you're reading these spots or fishing these spots in the fall for big walleyes?
Yeah, one thing when on any of the Great Lakes, I believe, but definitely here on Green Bay, I can tell you every day you have current. So when I run my lines out, I'll actually put my lines in and watch my baits right next to the boat, and you can tell which way the current is pulling. But I mean, like today, for example, there's a really good current coming out of the south, head to the north, and we set up and we caught them like mad going into the current. And we turned around and ran the same speed going with it and could not get bit. And so finally I adjusted my speed, bumped it up another quarter of a mile an hour, and we started getting bit. So when we were going against the current, we had a great action on our baits. We turned around, we were going with the current, and the baits just didn't have enough action, what the fish wanted, and we actually had to bump our speeds up. So current is, I mean, anywhere you have current is a huge factor. And If you watch it, you'll definitely put a lot more fish in the boat. Just do those fine, those little adjustments with your speed. Um, some days you gotta, if you're running harnesses, you'll be doing like zero point 0.9 to 1 mile an hour going into the current, and then when you're going with the current, you got to run like 1.4 or 1.5 to get them to eat again.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. Green Bay in the wintertime, notorious for big walleyes year-round, but I mean, through the ice, quite a destination. How much does your fall fishing contribute to some of that first ice? I mean, can you kind of stay on some of these fish, the last couple of days of the year in a boat, and then when the ice is safe, you get out there? I mean, is that kind of where you start where you left off in a boat, or are these fish going to be totally different areas?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're late in the fall. If the fish are all set up on a certain area, more than likely, definitely your first ice bite, those fish should still be in those general areas. I like the last couple of years, I paid a lot of attention to what the fish are doing late in the fall, and then we'll set up on some of those areas ice fishing if we can get to them. Of course, Green Bay's a pretty big beast, and you really got to watch pressure cracks and the thin ice with the shipping and stuff like that. But a lot of times I'll see, if the fish are set up really good on the east side in a certain area, they should be there, in that first, second week of January when we start ice fishing.
Luckily for us, we got a little ways before we got to put our ice gear on, but I find that stuff, just real valuable, good information just to have in your back pocket as the seasons go through. Talk a little, if you got time, talk a little bit about how the end of your summer has been going here. I know you do a lot of work on the bay, catching them big muskie. What have been some of the fun memories? What's some of the trendy stuff going on with the muskies that you've been working on?
Yeah, we've been having a phenomenal year on the muskies. We've been averaging like 1 to 3 fish a day, which on Green Bay we're more of a big trophy fishery here for big fish. So those are really good numbers for here, and we've had a lot of warm, stable weather, and muskies love it when it stays like that. So it's been a really good year. I've already got a dozen fish that are 50 plus in my boat for the year, and not even halfway into it. So just 3 days ago, we had a 11-year-old kid that was his birthday, and he wanted a trip with me for his birthday, and his dad brought him out, and he got a 54.5 by 25-inch muskie, about 45-pounder.
My goodness.
It's definitely been a pretty incredible year so far, and some happy faces, that's for sure.
How late do you typically guide muskies? I mean, you when you get into the muskies, that's obviously a whole commitment in itself, but you'll go back and forth a little bit with walleyes too, won't you? I mean, how late does the season go?
Yeah, I bounce back and forth between walleyes and muskies this time of the year. But typically, like last year, I ran right until about the third week in November. So basically our muskie season will start out. We have a spring bite, which our season opener is the last weekend in May every year. On that Saturday it opens. So we'll fish the tribs for a while, about a week to 10 days, and then those fish blow out of all the rivers. And then I won't fish them again until about the second week in July. And then from then until about the end of September is all mainly casting or trolling bucktails. We'll cast bucktails and a lot of rubber bulldogs and stuff like that. And then usually right around the 1st of October, we go to more of a trolling bite, pulling stuff like Rapala super shads and stuff like that. And we'll do that the whole month of October. And then right around the 1st of November, I go back to casting, and I go in the tributaries and the rivers, and I fish at nighttime. And that's usually about 3 to 4 weeks where that bite's really good. But I will bounce, and do a few walleye trips mixed in there as well. We'll do some trophy walleye stuff in the deeper structure. And then we got some really good spots where we get a lot of, I call them eater-sized fish, but the smaller walleyes that people want to keep and take home to eat.
Sure. You said something there that it's come up on this show before with other guys that fish muskies and walleyes. How do you contrast fishing the two of them? I mean, do you feel like, they complement each other, where the instincts and nuances that you utilize to catch muskies, do you think that it helps you as a fisherman all around, and then it carries over on a good day of walleye fishing, or are those two things just so far apart that, they take their own days on the water to figure out?
No, actually, in my mind, I relate what walleyes do on a daily basis and muskies do is a lot alike. So first thing in the morning, muskie fishing, I'm typically fishing shallow in the weeds, and then as it gets brighter and later in the day, the muskies will slide out and go deeper. So then it's kind of a chase game, and you're trying to follow where they're transitioning, which, when we're fishing walleyes, it's the same exact thing. You fish them, they'll be in low light, they're going to be shallow in the weeds or up on top of the flats, up at the top of the structure. And then when it gets bright, you'll see all of a sudden those fish start disappearing, and they start rolling through those deeper edges of the deeper structure. And, muskies and bass do the exact same thing every day. So it's, you put the two hand in hand, and you pay attention, and it can definitely better your fishing abilities as an angler by paying attention to both of those, because they do relate a lot to each other. And like today, I was out, we're muskie fishing, and we're fishing the weeds, and I watching my side scan on my electronics, and it's just absolutely peppered in there with smaller marks, which I knew were either perch or walleyes. So I told the guys, I said, hey, you want to take a break from muskie fishing for a couple minutes and catch some perch and walleyes? He's like, why do you think they're here? I was like, yeah, look at my graph. There's 200 of them right over there. And we grabbed a couple of jigging wraps that had on some small spinning rods, and one after another we're catching perch and walleyes both for about an hour, straight. We just about every single cast are just loaded in the weeds.
What would be some other trendy things to talk about? One thing I actually was just thinking about, you said you're casting at night. We're talking about muskies. What's the night bite look like sometimes in the fall for the walleyes? Is that kind of a big thing? I mean, is that an opportunity for people to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I fish a lot of the tributaries to Green Bay, a lot of the river systems late in the fall and November. And we catch a pile of big walleyes casting at night. What I focus on is warmer water areas that are holding warmer temperatures. And when you find that, you're going to have a pile of bait fish in those areas, and you're going to have all them big walleyes that are staging in those trips late in the fall. In those areas feeding. And typically at night, that bait in the river systems will lift up really high in the water column. And it's a lot of fun because you just slow rolling different like floating style crankbaits, super, super slow up high. And those walleyes are just crushing those baits. We had a blast last year doing it in the Fox River. That, and you're catching, big walleyes and, a muskie or two every night mixed in, because those two are feeding in the same areas on those gizzard shad in the rivers.
So when you say, water temperature driven, what's the nuance to that? I mean, is it subtle changes? Are you looking for water that's maybe 2 degrees different or 1 degree different, or is it usually pretty obvious and you come in, you get into a pocket where it's been protected and it's 10 degrees warmer? What are you usually looking for with that temperatures?
Yeah, it's never a real big swing, but it's typically, from anywhere from a degree to 3 degrees. If you can find something that's 2 to 3 degrees, you're just about guaranteed to have a lot of bait in those areas, because that bait definitely in the fall likes to concentrate in those warm water areas.
Right on, man. Well, I think we can put a bow on this. We've done pretty good. Where can people find you, Bret? What are your social medias, and where can people find some of your content?
They can look me up I'm on Facebook at Alexander Sport Fishing or Bret Alexander Professional Fisherman. They can look me up on my website at www.alexandersportfishing.com, or they can give me a call on my cell phone. My cell phone is 920-851-4214.
All right, Bret, thank you so much for the time once again. If there's anything you want to add, anything you can think of, now would be the time, man.
It's just every year, I think I see a lot of people just focus on what they've been doing for the last 10 years. And one thing I always tell my customers is challenge yourself to try new stuff, because once in a while you'll find something that's a hidden gem. Like this year, I found a couple new baits that I'm using that are just phenomenal that nobody else is using. And when you can find those little game changers, it can really put a lot more fish in the boat. So don't be afraid, any given day of the week to try something different, or look at different bodies of water and what people are using, like on Lake St. Clair and something, and try those tactics on a different body of water, because a lot of times they'll work and nobody else is doing it, and those fish haven't seen that technique or that bait, and it can pay big dividends on how many fish you're putting in the net every day.
I love it, man. I'll let you back at it, Bret. I appreciate all of this. Thank you so much, Bret. You have a good one, man.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
We'll talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Once again, thank you so much to Bret Alexander for taking the time to be on the show this week. I know his time is very valuable. He's a very busy guy, as you can tell. He's always multitasking, getting ready for the next guide trip. Hopefully he finds a little bit of time somewhere in his schedule to get a little bit of sleep. In the meantime, if you're following along on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts, make sure to like and subscribe and share with all your friends. And head over to our social medias at Instagram and Facebook, Jason Mitchell Outdoors, to recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming show.